Today we are talking about the Delphi Crime Scene. We'll be identifying runes and bindrunes. Or at least I will be presenting what I see as runes and bindrunes. So Abby and Libby were two 8th grade teenage girls who went for a walk on a public trail like anyone and everyone should be allowed to do, and were found murdered the next day not far from their last known location. It is not my intent to sensationalize what happened to these two young women, but this presentation is meant to show what I see, hopefully to find other people to further expand insights outside of my own. It is not my intent to stoke the flames of fear or intolerance. Pagans of all kind are good people, as are Christians and Muslims and Jews and atheists and animists and so on. We cannot allow the actions of depraved, selfish individuals to define whole communities. I consider people to be intelligent and responsible enough to understand this very simple concept. So it is also not my intent to convince anyone watching or reading this of my interpretation necessarily. I've chosen to examine the occult symbolism of this crime scene because, 1, former Carroll County prosecutor Robert Ives remarked that there were multiple signatures which appeared to be non-secular. 2, because the Franks memorandum, written by Richard Allen's defense team, cited an official law enforcement investigative report concerning the actions of individuals in nearby communities connected to Delphi, who were known practitioners of Asatru. 3, because the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit determined that the individuals responsible for the homicides had ties to or knowledge of Nordic beliefs. 4, because comments made by a Purdue professor of Germanic Studies, with the backing of a Harvard University colleague, both strongly believed that the crime scene was, without a doubt, someone trying to replicate Germanic runic script. And then just a brief warning, the following images and descriptions are upsetting due to their nature pertaining to the murders of Abby and Libby. Okay, so this image is graciously borrowed from the YouTube creator and artist True Crime Design. It has been slightly modified to be less graphic. At this time in late January 2024, this image is the most accurate and realistic depiction of the crime scene available to the public. And that's at least according to those claiming to have seen actual photos of the crime scene. So there are versions such as the Court TV depiction, and those have been considered to be very inaccurate. In the original artwork by True Crime Design, there are twigs arranged around the crown of Abby's head, laid out to resemble horns or antlers. Due to conflicting reports from creators, those twigs have been temporarily taken out of this modified image, just for the time being, and with absolutely no disrespect meant. I've also chosen to exclude the F tree for the time being. I do believe the F to represent the Fehu rune, but it is also possibly connected to themes involving warden tree spirits, land spirits, elements of the soul, and possible themes of ritual and sacrifice. So apart from doing a separate presentation, I do at some point plan on a separate presentation discussing the timing of the murders. Sorry about that. As they are also, let me put my phone on silent. Make sure I don't get any more interruptions. Okay. So, I do want to do a presentation discussing the timing of the murders because the timing is highly symbolic as well. At least I believe the timing to be symbolic. So, runes and bindrunes, what are they? So there are several runic alphabets. The most well-known and widely used is the Elder Futhark, which is the one I'll be using. There are 24 characters. They've been used by the Germanic tribes from the 2nd to the 8th centuries CE. There are other runic alphabets like the Younger Futhark, the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, other medieval and modern runic alphabets with different numbers of characters and whatever. They just share a common historical and cultural origin in the runic writing systems of the ancient Germanic peoples. So Bindrunes, they're a type of runic magic that combine 2 or more runes into a single symbol. They've been historically used in various Germanic and Norse traditions for protective or magical purposes. The choice of runes and their arrangement is based on the specific intention or purpose of the bind rune. People often use bind runes for personal talismans, amulets, or as part of rituals to bring about a desired outcome. So I tend to view bind runes as being akin to spell work, but you're usually just, drawing a little bind rune and folding it up and putting it in your pocket and carrying it on you for the day kind of thing. That's not to say that it can't be, more elaborate, and then just as an example of a bind rune that pretty much anybody can recognize is the Bluetooth logo here. So we have the Hagel here from the Younger Futhark, I believe, and then Berkana. And the Hagel is analogous to the Latin letter H, Berkana, analogous to the Latin letter B. These are the initials of Harald Bluetooth. He was a famous king and Viking raider. So, and that's just the combination of the two. So, okay. And I just want to differentiate too before we get any deeper into it that there are different ways of reading the runes. Some people say, oh, you can't read the runes reversed or in Merkstave or whatever. Some people are like, yeah, you have to. It really comes down to personal preference. So practitioners of runic divination have different opinions on how they read the runes. Some consider runes that are cast or drawn in their reversed position or upside down to have an opposite interpretation of the original runic meaning. Example, if the original rune Fehu represents abundance and bounty, reversed it may represent a lack or not having the right amount of something. And then, of course, reverse runes can also be referred to as Merkstave. So in this reverse column here, some runes keep their original form when drawn upside down, such as Hagelas here and Nautis. And also, for clarification, I'm using the term inverted to mean the mirror opposite. Like in this inverted column, not all mirror image runes are different from their reverse form. So Thurizaz inverted is the same as Thurizaz upside down or reversed. It's possible to draw or sketch the runes inverted, but like if you have a physical set of rune discs that are carved or they're burned into the little wood discs, or if you even have the printed oracle card decks, you would not be able to show the runes in their inverted forms, unless like Thurizaz, the rune appears inverted in its reversed position. But you can certainly draw them inverted. Okay, so with all of that now, I wanted to present my method for how I figured out what is what I see, how I got there. So we'll begin with the better, more accurate rendering of the crime scene by True Crime Design allowed me to better find potential runes, both in the placement of the sticks and in the bodily positioning. So the red here depicts the stick rune, and then the blue depicts the figure rune. So my method for finding the stick rune for each girl involved comparing the uniformity of the sticks. The sticks considered had to have a similar length and a similar thickness. And each girl has 3 similarly sized sticks placed over them. There is a 4th for both of them. Abby's is smaller, but of similar thickness to these other 3. Libby's is significantly larger and longer, and it's much thicker than the other 3 sticks. So for Abby, of the 3 uniform sticks, 2 are positioned parallel-ish to her, and they're to her right and to her left. The right vertical stick, or Abby's left, pins down her left shoulder and her left leg. And then this 3rd stick is perpendicular to and crossed over Abby and the other vertical sticks here. And I'm just calling that the horizontal stick. And basically the same thing applies over with Libby. There are 3 uniform sticks. 2 are positioned parallel-ish to her left and right. They are called the vertical sticks. Like Abby, but inverted, the left vertical stick, or Libby's right, pins down her right arm and her right leg. The 3rd stick, like Abby's, crosses over the 2 vertical sticks here and is also called the horizontal stick. Oh, sorry. Oh boy. Okay, so the stick rune, I also used a process of elimination to find the stick rune as well. So the geometry here requires that there are 2 vertical lines. Okay, so all the runes with these 2 vertical lines I found, lined them up, and then I needed a straight perpendicular line running horizontally, the horizontal line, to come in contact with the other vertical lines. Well, so I definitely couldn't get manas or aivas from either one of them just because the sticks were straight. So I felt this looked more like urus and this looked more like hagalas. Okay? So then, oh geez, sorry guys. Okay, I'm just gonna try not to move stuff too much. So for the figure rune, that was also found through a process of elimination. It was helpful to factor in the reversed and inverted runes, recalling the Purdue professor's remarks of the perpetrators, and I'm paraphrasing here, being Odin fanboys, which to me meant that, you know, the runes were kind of, they weren't formally drawn or anything. They could be in inverted or reverse form. So in finding Abby's figure rune, her bent right leg underneath her left leg resembled an isosceles triangle. And when looking at the Elder Futhark runes, the runes that had isosceles triangles attached to a single vertical line really came down to Thurisaz here, Raido, Wunyo, Barkana, and Manas. But right here, Barkana and Manas were eliminated because they had too much missing geometry. So I was left with Thurisaz and Wunyo, and ultimately I chose Thurisaz here because the extension of Abby's upper body and the extension of the left leg made for a longer line with the isosceles triangle more centrally located. And then with Libby, part of my illustration got cut off here, but this line goes over to here. I went back and forth between Gable and Nautes because the diagonal line, there was a diagonal line made by the arms, and both runes have diagonal lines bisecting another line, but I felt Nautes was more appropriate than Gable because Gable would have required her other arm to be raised above her head and potentially to have her legs a little further apart. So to go into more detail here and addressing Abby first, the figure rune again is Thurisaz, just like I discussed, finding the isosceles triangle and working from there. And Thurisaz is normally in this position, in which it's facing our right here. It's in this reversed position, which it can be found, in a deck of cards or in your discs of runes and stuff. It makes the th sound, as in thorn, or like Thursday. These were some other spellings, and it translates to giant or thorn. So then, that was the figure rune, and then looking at the stick rune, Hagalaz, it can't be reversed to change its structure. If you try to flip it upside down, it'll look exactly like it does. But it can be mirrored to change its original structure. So if you were to mirror it, it would probably end up looking something like this. But these are some of the variations of the rune that can be drawn just for Hagalaz. And then there were other spellings. I'm sure there are more spellings applied to this rune. The phonetic sound is H as in hat or hail. And it does translate to hail, but like a hailstone from the sky. So I do want to mention where I struggled. I struggled with this extra stick. If we are seeing runes, which I believe we are, was this placed here to confuse? Are there other ways to read this? Was this inadvertently placed here, perhaps when first responders found the girls and they disrupted the crime scene in an attempt to find vitals to see if they were breathing or whatnot? And this is speculation based off of rumor, but I do need open minds to tell me if they see anything. Please, if you see anything at all, leave it in the comments. Okay, so this is digging. I dug a lot through various sources to find some of the meaning behind the runes. And there are a lot of runic divination books out there. So beginning with Abby with the stick runes, which I believe to be Hagalaz, and that translates to hailstones. Hagalaz has some concepts that aren't necessarily great, but it tends to be associated with crisis, cancellation, delay, damage to an investment or a long-term project, the destructive elements of nature, disruption, reconstruction, restructuring, sudden change, trauma, unavoidable discomfort, and uncontrollable forces. And again, like I said, Hagalaz does not have a reverse position. I mean, it can have an inverted position, but it doesn't have the reverse. So I just said not available, but okay. So quoting Monfort, he wrote the Nordic runes. He says, quote, Hagalaz is a rune of disruption and delay. When plans are hit by unforeseen difficulties, it is an omen of sudden change, end quote. So hail blights the land. It destroys crops for future sustenance. It waylays voyages, business dealings, and productive time wasted when trying to salvage damaged goods. And then quoting Freya Aswin here in her book, from her book Northern Mysteries and Magic, she says, hail, quote, hail is a combination of two elements, air and water. It is well known that witches worked with the weather and could raise hailstorms to blight their enemies or crops. The Hagalaz rune can thus be used for extremely negative magic. I have used it, Freya Aswin is saying, I have used it in combination with Thurizaz, and the result was disastrous for the person who received it. In this working, the rune brought to this person's conscious mind all the suppressed garbage in his unconscious. The symptoms he displayed would, to an uneducated mind, suggest demonic possession. End quote. It's a bit harsh, but okay. So, while Hagalaz, it appears mostly destructive, it's not chaotic. It's a natural process, part of the order of the worlds. To quote, what is his name? Wayland Skala Grimson, who wrote Heathenry of Save Asatru. He says, quote, after the destruction, the hail turns to water, nourisher of man and crops alike. Everything is a tool, everything furthers, end quote. So the silver lining can be found in how one reacts to failure. It is about learning and coming away with something constructive. And then quoting Gunderson's Teutonic Magic, he says, quote, it is a mighty rune when warding against entropic or chaotic forces. And to quote Idrid Thorson, he says, it is an effective, powerful weapon or tool for protection. Interestingly, Hagalaz in its younger Futhark form, which is this over here, it allows for all runic forms to be derived from the sixfold Hagalaz, especially when placed within a solid figure. So basically, Hagalaz can encompass you can draw all the other runes within this, is what he's saying here. Hagalaz also has other more esoteric connections with certain runes. For instance, Gunderson uses Thurizaz to explain Hagalaz. Thurizaz melds fire and ice to create force which breaks down form. Hagalaz uses ice and fire to create that form which holds and guides force. So he's kind of showing there's interplay and there's connection between the runes. In Thorson's Futhark, a handbook of rune magic, he compares Uruz with Hagalaz, summarizing that the Uruz rune represents the creative force that gives Hagalaz its form. So, Hagalaz seems to be connected with a lot of other runes, is what I took from that. But, I mean, again, you know, when you're reading this in a divination, you can find good elements. Like, you know, a lot of people draw this rune and they think, oh my god, you know, something terrible is going to happen. It could be just a way of saying look out and persevere whenever you can. Because that's just what you got to do, I don't know if I like ascribing so much negativity to these runes. But so we've covered the stick rune, okay? And Hagalaz was the 9th rune of the alphabet, of the Futhark alphabet. We're moving on to then Thurisaz, which is the 3rd rune of the Futhark alphabet. It literally translates to thorn or giant. And its key concepts are chaos, defense, destruction, devastation, disruption, emotional volatility, fire, hostile environment, life, death, polarity, malignant forces, misfortune, powerful opposition, persecution, undermined safety and security, threat to order, torment, unrestrained instinct, weaponized applied power. And then, remarkably, the Merc stave of this rune, which, what you would think would be the opposite, is just, it's actually an intensification of all the above concepts. Which, whoa, yeah. So, quoting, who are we quoting here? We're quoting Scholar Grimson here. He says, quote, "This rune has nearly 2 identical meanings, thorn and thirst. A thirst is a giant, a Jotun, an enemy of both gods and men. It is a monster that torments women, a blindly destructive force of chaos." And then he goes on to say, the lesson of Thurisaz is twofold. So first, misfortune is integral to growth. And then second, fight fire with fire. End quote. So learning that misfortune is integral to growth is to learn to be cheerful, presumably to be ready in a position to manipulate a weakness into a strength. And that's how you find the silver lining in some of these runes that seem very heavy. But Scholar Grimson notes that the second lesson of Thurisaz is to fight fire with fire. He suggests accomplishing this by the way of thorns or by the way of Thor. So in regards to thorns, while thorns are harmful, thorn hedges are regularly grown to keep people and animals out of a field. They were also used to protect sacred enclosures. And then, similar to thorns, Thor, he was the protector of Asgard, or the realm of the gods of the Aesir, and Thor was also the protector of Midgard, the earthly human realm. Thor, though half giant by his mother, was an indomitable foe to the Jotuns of chaos. Scholar Grimson suggests that the rune Thurisaz has the power to, quote, master misfortune, chaos, and destruction, to accept them, to use them, to turn them back upon themselves, and vanquish them, end quote. So, that's a positive way of looking at it. Then following that, we have Freya Aswin. She considers the rune's ascribed Christian reputation as evil as being mostly true. Which then I was like, oh, okay. So she writes, quote, "Thurisaz is the most powerful aid in harmful rune workings, but it is so double-sided that it can backfire very easily and very quickly. Most of the runes have either a neutral mediating position, as in the case of the non-invertibles, or else distinct positive upright or negative reverse positions from which the influence of that rune can be deduced in a given reading. Not so with Thurisaz. Although it is reversible and therefore should be clear-cut in its meaning, i.e. either positive or negative, it does not work in the same way as do most of the runes." And then she goes on to tell a little anecdotal story. She says, "A friend meditating on this rune received the visual image of a nuclear explosion. On an occult level, this would describe rather accurately the potential of Thurisaz," end quote. So Freya's Frey Aswin's basically saying here that many runes, when they're in their reverse position, are meant to kind of be the opposite of what the original rune was, like we've talked about earlier. But Frey is saying, not so with Thurisaz. She says it's actually an intensification, and that's what most people say. Most of the authors of the books that I have read have said. So, Aswin goes on to note that Thurisaz is an excellent carrier, implying that when combined with other runes, it amplifies the powers and effectiveness of those runes. The raw potential of Thurisaz is easy to tap into because it is accessed through uninhibited passion. The more emotion put into or working with Thurisaz, the more successful it is likely to be. And then, quoting Aswin again, she says, quote, "But make no mistake, Thurisaz is probably the most dangerous rune in the whole Futhark," end quote. Her words are helpful reminders that fighting fire with fire may be necessary, but probably only as a last resort. And it is my opinion that sometimes fighting fire with fire engulfs the whole world. So it doesn't seem like a reliable rune to use unless you really wanted to cause harm. If you believe in magic, and if you believe that, casting runes or bind runes, meant for someone else is actually going to cause them harm. So, to finish this up, in Idrid Thorson's Futhark, a Handbook of Rune Magic, he describes Thurisaz as, quote, detrimental to the established and instinctual life urge exemplified by the gods and expressed in mankind, which I found, end quote, what I found very kind of alarming. And then in Paul Rees Montfort's Nordic runes, he alludes to the rune's historical use as a, quote, stave of black magic used to bring ill luck on the victim, especially for women, end quote. And of course, the violence against women, the torments of women, all of those things were not lost on me either. So, okay, in the Volsunga saga, Odin uses a sleep thorn to induce a magical coma on the Valkyrie Brunhild, and the thorn has been found in many mythic themes, similar in plot to Sleeping Beauty, as being harmful to women. There are other myths and legends in the sagas that, harken back to this idea. And then, quoting Montfort, he says, Thurisaz carries with it the challenge of pulling away from the agent of ill luck, which implies to me that Thurisaz, once you're ensnared, it's really difficult to get away. At least magically, or in the concept of a magical application of that. Okay, so with the figure rune and with the stick rune, this is the bind rune. So Hagalaz here is in the red, Thurisaz is in the blue, and then these down here, these guys, are some examples of possible bind rune compositions of Hagalaz and Thurisaz in their non-reversed forms. And again, I don't know how much emphasis or importance to put on reverse versus inverted runes, because I would think as somebody who draws bind runes, it would be important to be able to work with those. So I don't necessarily believe that the killer or killers had really a hard and fast rule about the runes that they left, so to speak. So with the information on the Hagalaz and the Thurizaz rune, this is kind of what I interpreted. So Hagalaz does not have the reversed Merkstave meaning. If cast upside down, it reads the same. Thurizaz, however, can be read as reversed. Drawing Bindrunes in their reverse format is not very common, perhaps in part because Bindrunes are already difficult to read and individual runes are difficult to discern. Therefore, many Bindrunes tend to be drawn with the included runes in their more easily identifiable form, at least initially for the beginner. Okay? I will say that. It could be, a walk in the park for somebody who's been drawing Bindrunes for, years, right? And they would know what they're trying to say. It could be that the killer or killers were well acquainted with runes in their upright and reversed positions, or possibly attributed specific meaning to reversed, the Merkstave, and inverted, mirrored runes. So anything is possible. It is very likely that the killer or killers intended to terrify those witnessing the crime scene when they left ritual signatures with notable implications of at least looking like ritualistic homicide. So the killer or killers intended to horrify those discovering and processing the crime scene. They intended to torment the people living in the immediate vicinity along Deer Creek and the private drive. They intended to taunt law enforcement and terrorize the community. So, if we're wondering how Bindrunes can be used, I feel like they were used in this instance as a spell. What was done to Abby and Libby was meant to be harmful magic, and not just inflicted upon them, but that harmful magic was meant to be inflicted on someone, an individual or a group, who could understand the symbols left at the crime scene, assuming they would ever have access to it, right? So, while Bindrunes have positive uses, it would be magical karmic roulette to use 2 murdered children and a magical working meant to bring in good and positive outcomes. So if you're the killer using murdered children to cast a spell with Bindrunes, you're doing it to send out negative energy, not to bring in you're sending out negative energy to hurt other people. It's directed to somebody else. You're not murdering 2 children to bring in positive energy for yourself, if that makes sense. I mean, there are instances of warring clans of people that will then, they kill the warriors and they take on the property of those warriors by ritually murdering them or whatever. And, those are few and far between. Those are probably mostly just historical tidbits that come down to us. But it would be very unlikely that murdered children would be used in anything other than bad magic against somebody else. So therefore the spellwork seen at the Delphi crime scene is directly meant to curse or harm someone or someone's known to the killer or killers. In my opinion, the Hagalaz plus Thurizaz rune, Bindrune, was seemingly meant as a message for the community. It was potentially meant to curse an individual or a group. As Aswin noted, when using the Hagalaz plus Thorisaz Bindrune against someone, they had suffered symptoms akin to demonic possession. One doesn't need to believe in magic to understand that anyone willing to curse with Bindrunes, let alone murder, has deep-seated vindictive rage, stemming from a possible humiliation or perceived grievous affront to their sense of self by the individual or group for whom the curse is meant. So, again, this is just my interpretation. I see Hagalaz there to blight the land. It feels territorial. Hagalaz to blight the land, to make it unlivable, to terrorize into exile. Like a territorial blitzkrieg of anxiety and dread to drive away the wrongdoers, which in the killer's mind is, who the curse is directed to, is the wrongdoers to them. To delay their progression or stymie their success. And I see Thorisaz in its Merksave position to make the devastation caused by Hagalaz complete, but excessively so. This combination is meant to psychologically unhinge the receiver into a self-destructive state of despair, destroying any imaginable semblance of safety and security. And that's just my interpretation. I am very excited to hear other people's interpretations, assuming that it's constructive and not just calling me crazy, because I've heard that before. And I really believe that I at least see something, I don't think I'm crazy, not completely. So now we're going to take a look at Libby. I apologize. I'm going through this as fast as I can. I kind of have to do it all in one go, and I've been doing several takes of this, so my voice is starting to give out. I apologize. Let's just try to get through this. So for the figure rune for Libby, we have Nautes. And, these are the other variations that you'll see it written as in, different books from different traditions. The phonetic sound is associated with N as in need, and it literally translates to need or necessity. So, Nautes cannot be reversed to change its structure, but it can be inverted or mirrored to change its structure. So this is Nautes inverted. And then looking at the stick rune over here, that did not turn up very easily seen, no. But this is what we're looking at here. Oh, God. Sorry. We're professionals over here. The stick rune for Libby was Uruz, but I believe inverted, because Uruz can be reversed, it can be Merksave, and it looks more like horns then, because it's upside down. But the phonetic sound of Uruz is like an U sound, as in, I couldn't really find a similar phonetic thing, so I just said used. So used, oozed. So and then it translates literally to aurochs or strength. And then these were just some other graphic variations of the rune. But I will point out here that I did want to mention this extra large branch, this here, may also be incorporated into the runic composition. It's not similar in length or thickness to these other sticks, but it could be. It would still help shape the inverted Uruz rune. However, I believe this extra large branch could be different from other branches and sticks that share a similar thickness of around 4 inches, 10 centimeters, give or take, in circumference, the measurement around something. But comparatively, the extra large branch, which could measure around 12 inches, 30 centimeters in circumference, I think it's there to help weigh down Libby's raised left arm in order to make it stay in place to touch the F tree. And that's just my opinion. But I did want to put that in there. I did not forget about this big branch. Okay, so just some information on Uruz. It's the second rune in the Futhark alphabet. It literally translates to the aurochs, which is an extinct ox. It also translates to strength, and I've seen in places where it can translate to drizzle. Some of the key concepts include a challenge, a trial or contest, a confrontation of adversity, trials by ordeal, facing adversity, initiation, and testing times of test. And then it is capable of being in the Merkstave position, in which it represents failing to meet life's trials, suffering conquest, being gored in the game of life, and, such ideas as like weakness, obsession, domination. It sounds like a loss of emotional control, or like letting base instincts get the better of us. So in Idrid Thorson's Northern Magic, he describes Uruz or Ur as the vital organic energy of life and the power which organizes and holds life together. It is a power of purification. Ur drives out elements that may cause one to be weak. This is a purification that leads to strength. And Galder is spell work involving chanting and incantation. The power of Ur can be used to bind other runes together in an organized fashion. It is a sign of tenacious willpower, and it is a sign of striving toward inner goals. So, to quote Skara Grimson in his Heathenry, a Study of Asatru, he says, quote, "This is a rune of raw, transcendent power. It is the rune of the individual, rather than a rune of social interaction," end quote. Uruz represents an initiation or a rite of passage that involves becoming the best by learning from the best. Skara Grimson likens Uruz to ancient man fighting off much larger animals by trying to assimilate aspects of those animals. This rune teaches the practitioner in finding the power of the auroch, it's probably aurochs, within, becomes a match for all the world has to offer. So it encourages you to become the thing that you are trying to defeat, which is interesting, has interesting connotations. So in Idrid Thorson's Futhark, he suggests that the Uruz rune is the forming force, not the form itself. So it seems like it's more energy formatted. It's the patterning and the formulating power in the multiverse, the source of the ordering principles that lead to the final formulation of the world. This is the cosmic seed, analogous to the semen virile, end quote. And while Uruz is often likened to the seed, it's also called like the mother of, it has motherly connotations. I'm forgetting what it is right now. Let's see. So Thorson compares Uruz with the Hagalaz rune. And then this was spooky because this was even before I found the rune forms first, and then I started researching. Well, the other stick rune is Hagalaz for Abby, and it says that Uruz is the creative force that provides Hagalaz its form. Uruz is the seed, Hagalaz is the egg. So they're counterparts, the two runes. The rune Uruz is linked in Germanic myths to the great cow Oldhumla, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, who inadvertently manifested new life. The connection between Uruz and Hagalaz was not lost on me. Those were the runes that I was just telling you about, the stick runes that I saw, the Livy with Uruz, Abby with Hagalaz, and that was before I started researching. So Oswin's interpretation of Uruz's manifesting properties helped to bring Hagalaz into perspective for myself. She says, quote, "The energy behind this rune, Uruz, is the force of the masculine polarity, the unconscious drive for manifestation. It is the inextinguishable impulse to be, the energy behind the forms of nature which survives all attempts at destruction. Uruz is indestructible, raw, primitive, and unbelievably strong. Uruz symbolizes strength, persistence, durability, and adaptability to environmental changes," end quote. And then, quoting Gunderson from Teutonic Magic, he says, quote, "In workings of woe," which is negative, harmful magic, "Uruz can be used either to control another directly or to put that person at the mercy of the internal or external forces which they cannot control," end quote. So that was just a little bit of information on Uruz. And now for a little bit of information on Nautes. Nautes is the 10th rune of the Elder Futhark. And here is it is in its inverted or mirrored form. Again, it doesn't appear to have a merc stave, but there were places that I found where inverted runes were getting readings too, which I found very interesting. So people can decide what they mean, what the inverted form of runes means to them. Okay, so Nautes. Nautes it translates to literally need or necessity. The key concepts include need, banishing harmful energies, being bound, conflict, constraint, distress, effort, force of growth, friction, hard work, inability to act, karmic challenge, needing new perspective, oppressive grief, reset, resistance, ritual purification, and urgency. Nautes is a rune of fate containing opposing aspects of both misery and redemption. Nautes expresses the imbalance between what one wants and what one needs. Quote, "Nautes warns of hardship and constraint. Lying between the oppressive staves Hagalaz, which is the hailstone, and Isa, which is ice, it pairs two unpleasant aspects, suffering and the inability to act, representing what is sometimes described as karmic challenge. The Norse parallel is weird. There's a well of weird. It's a concept. The force that dictates our individual fate," end quote. And that was Montfort, his Nordic runes. So suffering may be inflicted by outside forces, but they may be afflicted on ourselves. So for instance, Odin's subjugation of himself to intense suffering for 9 nights and 9 days differs from self-affliction that is neither helpful nor productive. And then briefly, just to describe what weird is, it's the concept of fate. And I felt that the skaldskeep.com did a really good job of describing this, hence why I took this whole quote. So weird is the concept of fate. It is the reality that exists around us, influenced by our collective actions. And then Orlog is like the threads of the fate, but it is the relationship between actions and outcomes. And it can be actions and outcomes. It can be both of those things too. So outcomes of the past inform our present reality. Present reality informs our past actions. Present actions inform future outcomes. Future outcomes manifest and become outcomes of the past, and then the cycle continues ever onward. However, this process isn't linear and isolated. The actions of others can also affect us and our actions can affect them. Actions and outcomes weave in and out of one another to create the web of weird. Orla can be thought of as the threads. Our reality affects our actions, but our actions also affect reality. So this is just basically showing that so many things are interconnected, that we really can't escape it. You know, it's not fatalism in the sense that we understand, like, you there's predestination, you can't change things, but everything is interconnected. That's basically a lot of what I'm trying to say. And to me, it makes sense because it has these opposing aspects. Weird makes sense to me as being related to Naughties because it contains the opposing aspects of misery and redemption. So it's kind of like taking back your fate. Like when life deals you a bad hand, you come back at it, you fight fire with fire. Not really, but you get what I'm saying. You're coming back stronger. And mostly because you had to suffer. So, and then also this was important. Naughties also represents the need fire, an old ritual that involved the starting of a fire by friction alone. So basically, when you're rubbing the vertical stick and the horizontal stick, and you're trying to get a friction fire, that is the need fire, and that is hard to do, to get a light on that thing. So the need fire was built and lit when dire circumstances such as failing crops or sick livestock called for magical measures. It was believed that the smoke from the ritual need fire could clean and cure the ailing animals. Ritual fires also provided sacrifice to the spirits of the land or the gods. So it's an attempt at purification. Magically, Naughties could be used to successfully restrict other people, to fetter another person and render his actions impotent. That was Oswin, quoting from Oswin. In Teutonic magic, Gunderson notes that Naughties rules the ability to guide the great power of deliberate sexual frustration. When used for dubious purposes, this rune could impose great difficulty, and while regarded as having negative associations, Naughties was worn or carried to avert the effects of dark magic or magics that involved like manipulation or enchantments, getting you to do something you don't want to do. So Naughties typically appeared to those who limited themselves and they lacked awareness that their greatest obstacle was they themselves. They were their greatest obstacle was of their own making in the form of self-sabotage. Naughties also appeared as a reminder to pay back old or outstanding debts or to repair damaged goods and frayed friendships. So I was basically picking out parts about Uruz and Naughties with the Bindrune associated with Libby, and then Hagalaz and Thurisaz with Abby, to show that, like, potentially, if these are Bindrunes with those runes in them, there is a message that's being conveyed, and it has to do with the symbolism attached to those runes. So, to go over this Bindrune, the Uruz here is in the red, the Naughties here is in the blue, Uruz symbolizing the stick rune, blue, and Naughties symbolizing the figure rune. And then these are some examples of Bindrune compositions of Uruz and Naughties in their inverted forms. So this is their inverted form, and then this is their normal form. If we were to uninvert them. So now for the interpretation. And, again, take this with a grain of salt. This is just what I see. So there was a Bindrune configuration, in my opinion, of an inverted Uruz and an inverted Nautis. So while Uruz has a reversed Merkstave meaning, Nautis does not. We've gone over this. And as established earlier, both the inverted Uruz and inverted Nautis are different from Merkstaves. Okay. Again, drawing Bindrunes in their inverted position is not very common, but still very possible. It makes sense. It makes seeing, realizing, and interpreting the Bindrune more challenging, though, when it's, anything goes. That's why it did take me a while. Even with the improved drawing, artistic rendition of true crime design, it took me a while to finally start seeing some of these runes. However, the crime scene suggests a fair amount of planning. So, okay. Let me start over. So, again, drawing Bindrunes in their inverted position is not very common, but still very possible. It makes seeing, realizing, and interpreting the Bindrune more challenging, though. It could be that the perpetrator or perpetrators, in their hurry, inverted these runes. However, the crime scene suggests a fair amount of planning and a fairly solid understanding of the runes. So why go to all the effort to then invert the runes accidentally? And they could have just done it accidentally, but to me the inversion feels intentional and could be an attempt to appear more amateur to investigators, possibly like Odin fanboys. Okay? And then, Then the intent, my interpretation of the intent behind the Uruz plus Nautis Bindrune was very confusing for me, okay? Because this could have a ton of meanings. And that's why I need other people's insight too. So I saw that Uruz out of balance, when it's in imbalance, it's not balanced, it signifies unrestrained strength or an overwhelming excessive use of force. A reversed or Merkstave Uruz could suggest uncontrollable urges like impulsive, volatile emotional fluctuations, unruly lust, or irrepressible rage. So would an inverted Uruz weaken the strength of an enemy? Was it meant to give the perpetrator overpowering strength? Again, going back to what I said in Libby's Bindrune section, I see this as being negative magic being directed toward someone or a group of someone's by the perpetrators. So, Nautis out of balance signifies choosing the wrong path, which causes great distress, anxiety, restlessness, and dread. This could apply to a broader concept like fate, or it could be more mundane, like setting with the wrong people or making self-sabotaging decisions. Looking at the two runes together, to me, implies a powerful binding spell. Well, Uruz has more physical implication. Nautis has more connotations concerning the mind. There may be many ways to magically bind someone, but weaponizing the intended victim's minds against themselves would be an effective power move. It would be like the victims would essentially be harming themselves because they'd be cognitively bound and immobilized, through fear or confusion. Assuming people are doing this for magical purposes and they believe magic works, okay? And then finally, the Bindrune of Uruz and Nautis, it seems to me it feels like a spell of attrition. like a never-ending contest that appears achievable, but only ever results in failure. And to me, those kind of things are very frustrating for people, to always feel like they're on the brink of having something conquered or figured out or solved or whatever. But it always eludes them. So, and to me, I felt that the Urus and Nautis combined was meant to wear down hope and exhaust with despair, which is very unsettling, considering that this was combined in murders with children. Okay, I mean, young women, okay, but still with their whole lives ahead of them, and to be killed in this way is just possibly because somebody was trying to send another person a terrifying message. And this is very, the whole crime scene feels very brazen, like they expect to get away with that. And unfortunately, I mean, we've gone this long, and it's very questionable as to whether Richard Allen is involved in any way, shape, or form. So, in conclusion, finally, if you got through this, thank you. I really appreciate it. Put a lot of time into this. So the reason I decided to look into this was because, I mean, there was information, coming from Robert Ives that was saying that the crime scene and the signatures left at the crime scene were non-secular in nature. The investigative report, the Odin report, in the Franks memorandum, and then the affirmation from the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, and the academic insight pertaining to the Norse, Germanic, pagan aspects of the crime scene. Like, all of these things was like, I might as well look into this, because there are enough reputable people here that know their stuff that seem to think something suspicious is happening. And it's not related to bad heathens or bad pagans or anything. This is a select group, or one individual, but I think more likely a group of individuals that, I don't know what would possess you to do this, other than to really, it feels like somebody's trying to stick something to somebody, for a lack of a better description. And so then, with the much better and much appreciated artistic rendition provided by True Crime Design on YouTube, I felt more confident identifying potential runes and Bindrunes. I walked you through the method that I developed of identifying runes individually. First, identifying a stick rune for each girl. Sticks that were similar in thickness and length became the initial template for determining the stick rune. Then I used the form that found in the placement of the sticks, compared those forms to the Elder Futhark runes, and found similar matches in Hagalaz and Urus. So the figure rune involved comparing the geometry of the runes to the posed positions of the girls. And then through a process of elimination, I found similar forms in Tharisas and Nautis. Using the combination of the figure plus stick runes for each girl appeared to create a Bindrune Hagalaz and Tharisas Bindrune over Abby, and an Urus plus Nautis Bindrune over Libby. I believe that each Bindrune depicts a harmful spell meant for someone who would recognize the symbolic implications that they presented. I interpreted what I believed to be the message behind the Bindrunes, but I am one person and would certainly appreciate the kind, thoughtful insights of others. Thank you for taking the time to watch. I hope to have another video out at some point about the timing of the murders, and then also details into the F tree and possible magical connections to the land. But at this time, thank you so much. And I hope this was helpful, and I hope to be helped later. So thank you. Bye.